Welcome to Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. I'm Peter Gross, co-host of the original Wild Kingdom with Marlon Perkins and Jim Fowler. For more than 50 years, Wild Kingdom explored wildlife and our natural world. Tonight's episode, and many others, focus on the timeless value of wildlife conservation. Wild Kingdom played a critical role in changing public attitudes about the importance of animals for the health of our planet and our own quality of life. We challenge viewers to learn about animals and get involved in conservation in their local communities. That call to action resulted in more visits to local zoos, nature preserves, and even observing animals in their natural habitats. And that connection with animals benefits all of us in the Wild Kingdom. So sit back, relax, and enjoy Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom right here on RFD TV.
Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom is presented by Mutual of Omaha, people you can count on.
Welcome to Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. Despite the encroachment of man and his developments, this spot retains much of the beauty it held when this nation was born 200 years ago, or even 400 years ago, when Europeans first settled along America's east coast. A short distance from here, in this direction, is where a fort was established by the Spanish after they landed here in 1565. This huge stone fort, surrounded by a great moat, was built beginning in 1672 near the site of the Spanish landing. The fort was called Castillo de San Marcos, and the settlement there was named St. Augustine, destined to become the oldest city in the United States. It was a lush subtropical land, mysterious and in some ways terrifying, yet intriguing with its promise of fortune and empire. Having landed on these shores, they found a vast continent awaiting exploration. And this tiny toehold where they built their fort was the beginning. Here on the huge peninsula, which Ponce de Leon had earlier named Florida, they soon began penetrating inward, lured by their dreams of riches and territorial claim. In this land of swamps and woodlands, marshes and beaches, and mangrove coastlines, they found an interior rich in wildlife. One fairly familiar animal quickly encountered in the upland swamps was the black bear.
The black bear was a source of good meat. It was dangerous when angered, so they generally left it alone in its Florida range, extending southward into the Everglades, that great sea of grass dotted by hammocks of low trees. This was home for another large mammal, the most widespread predator in the Western Hemisphere, the cougar. It avoided human contact, but still the Spaniards slew it in great numbers. Large flocks of beautiful white egrets congregated in their rookeries among the low-growing mangrove trees near coastal areas. Because these handsome birds had beautiful plumes during their breeding season, they were destined for near destruction. The Spaniards also saw the graceful osprey. In the coastal waters, they watched the large brown pelicans diving after fish near the surface. One of the strangest creatures was the huge, totally inoffensive, and rather formless manatee, or sea cow. All too soon, the Spaniards found the manatee an excellent source of meat and hunted them extensively. But the animal they found, which was most representative of this subtropical portion of the New World, has as well as most to be feared, was a powerful multi-toothed reptile of rivers and swamps. The Spaniards call him the lizard, in their tongue, el lagarto. This name eventually evolved to become alligator. It seemed impossible to even dent their vast population, and men killed them indiscriminately. The wanton killing of the alligators by the Spaniards in the Florida swamplands established a pattern of wildlife destruction destined to become white man's terrible trademark in this great land. This destruction was a pattern the English continued when, under Captain John Smith, they established Jamestown on the shores of the James River just upstream from Chesapeake Bay. They named the land Virginia after Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen. Here, too, wildlife was abundant. In addition to cougars and bears, just like the Spaniards encountered, they found the wolf in large numbers. The wolf was then still a long way from being pushed into the Canadian wilds. Foxes roamed here also, both the gray fox of the woodlands and the red fox of generally more open country, and considerably less intimidated by man. Here as well was the handsome bald eagle, whose appearance and fierceness, whose strength and free spirit would one day make it become the symbol of the nation to be born here.
Jamestown was settled in 1609. Just 11 years later, farther north, the third of the permanent settlements was founded. It was now 1620 when the Pilgrims landed in what they called New England and established a colony named Plymouth in what later became Massachusetts. This northeastern portion of the land was abundant with bird and mammal species. Many of the animals were of value to the new settlers.
The white-tailed deer became venison for the pioneers. In a fervor of thanksgiving for this land's bounty, the Pilgrims raised the wild turkey to the exalted spot it has occupied since. Once, this bird was almost accepted as our national symbol instead of the bald eagle. The ruffed grouse, distinctively drumming on logs, led hunters ever deeper into a wilderness of forests and lakes. A wilderness populated with the largest of the deer family, the moose, and it became another natural meat source for the pioneers. The elk fitted into that same category. Widespread in the east then, it was a magnificent animal enthusiastically hunted and swiftly eliminated here. The bold bobcat was among the most common predators roaming these same woods and fields. Wild geese filled the skies, sharing the air with one of the most strikingly beautiful falcons of eastern North America, the peregrine, or American duckhawk. Its grace and flight and incredible speed were unmatched by anything else in the air. Cottontail rabbits were everywhere. Opossum families were a familiar sight, and nimble squirrels filled the forests with their chattering. The raccoon, one of nature's most adaptable mammals, learned quickly to fear man while living very close to him. There was, at first, in this beautiful land, an incredible number of animals. But eastern America was gradually being settled, and wildlife was sharply diminishing. Nobody was really concerned, and it seemed they would never be.
This is the headwaters of the Mississippi River, that great natural boundary which bisects our country. The colonization of the continent by Europeans had been going on for nearly 200 years, and yet the vast country westward of this river was still largely unknown. East of the Mississippi River, the Americans had won their revolution, and the 13 colonies had become 13 states. But westward of the big river was a great relatively unknown territory owned by the French and called by them Louisiana. The purchase of this sprawling territory was the first great land acquisition of the United States. Soon afterward, the new government fitted out an expedition under William Clark and Meriwether Lewis, and they were ordered to explore and report on that wild territory to the westward of this river.
That expedition followed the Missouri and Yellowstone rivers to their headwaters. It crossed the Continental Divide, following the Snake River, and then the Columbia to its mouth on the Pacific. It passed through a magnificent new empire, at last unlocked for settlement. It was the first of many expeditions opening the great west of this continent, a new territory even more teeming with wildlife than the East had been. It was a land where wildlife was too plentiful, it seemed, ever to disappear. Here there were sights to set the pulse racing, such as the American bison. Also called buffalo, the bison filled the Great Plains in unbelievable herds, numbering millions of individual animals. Mounds of earth indicated tunnel networks covering scores of miles. These were called prairie dog towns, after the large rodents which constructed them. Fierce badgers preyed on them, catching them on the surface or digging them out with powerful claws, while the less energetic coyote tried to outsmart the rodents. And if they escaped, it was never really any great loss to the predator, since the same area was practically overrun by large jackrabbits, which were simple to catch. The prairie chicken, settlers quickly learned, was large and fine to eat, and the delectable sage grouse was easy to kill. It was a vast, breathtaking, magnificent land, and even high on the mountains, wildlife was everywhere. Herds of bighorn sheep grazed contentedly on the grasses of the highest slopes. And high above timberline, mountain goats climbed with great skill on sheer rock faces. The elk, now essentially gone from the east, still were commonplace here. The beautiful but melancholy voices of the world's largest waterfowl, the trumpeter swan, sounded frequently in the crisp mountain air. Grizzly bears were here too, and as virtually everywhere else on the continent, the cougar. More than for any other reason in these early times, American wildlife was put in jeopardy because of the fur bearers, such as the otter. These animals were most responsible for initially bringing the white man deep into the wilderness because their furs represented fortune. Otters were in practically every river, along with their close relatives, the mink. Less aquatic, but still found most commonly near the streams. Richly furred pine martens inhabited forests, but to their own detriment, they were much too simple to trap. Even wolves had fur valuable enough to justify their being trapped. But the animal most responsible for opening America's interior was the beaver, with fur so valuable that for a time whole empires revolved on the trade in its pelts. The continent's wildlife resources were being excessively reaped. It simply couldn't last.
As the settlers moved across the continent to this country's far northwestern coast, the excessive destruction of wildlife continued. Here on this wild northwestern coastline, marine mammals were now added to the list of those being wantonly slaughtered. This included sea lions such as these. Great numbers of them inhabited this rocky coast. Elephant seals, which shared this same habitat, also became victims to man's encroachment. Still, settlement was relatively slow until suddenly gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill in a land called California. And with that, a tremendous surge of humanity poured into the West.
As the settlers came trekking over prairies and deserts and mountains, they continued that pattern established nearly 3 centuries earlier by the Spanish in Florida. The pattern of killing wildlife with reckless abandon wherever encountered. Bison were slaughtered by the hundreds of thousands, millions. These herds were seemingly endless, and the animals were occasionally killed for their meat, sometimes for their fur, frequently for the tongue alone as a table delicacy. Far too often they were casually destroyed just for the fun of shooting something. Some people even labeled it sport. Bison hides were not particularly valuable, but there was great value in the furs of the seals which inhabited the country's entire Pacific coastline. The same was true of the sea otters, which were taken in such numbers for their rich fur that extinction became a real threat. The grizzly bear of the Rockies was disappearing, as were the pronghorn antelope of the foothills of those mountains. Farther south in the more arid mountains of the Southwest, jaguar were being decimated. Even the wild pig of the desert, the peccary, once extremely populous, was now becoming scarce. So were the raccoon-like coati-mundi of that same terrain. Even worse than the destruction of individual animals was the destruction of vast stretches of natural habitat. Deliberate fires, or those caused through carelessness by the settlers, destroyed untold millions of acres of grasslands and the wildlife upon them. The same thing was occurring in the great forests. In one way or another, the entire surface of the country was being raped of its natural resources.
With startling suddenness, there was no longer a plentiful supply of wildlife in America. Animals once numerous, beyond belief, were now extinct or well on the road to annihilation. It was American wildlife's most desperate time. And it was at this juncture that a man of both power and vision came along and took steps to rectify, wherever possible, the damage that had been done. Our wildlife heritage had very nearly been squandered, but now a way was being pointed out to restore it. There were many people by this time who recognized the plight of American wildlife, but few who had the power to do anything about it. The one who did was one of the 4 great presidents whose images have been carved into the face of Mount Rushmore here in South Dakota. They were men of vision and strength. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln. It was Theodore Roosevelt who took the steps necessary to rescue America's wildlife heritage. Even though Roosevelt recognized the dire straits American wildlife was in and took strong steps to make this trend reverse itself, for some species it was already too late, for they were too low in numbers to recover despite the new protection. So they became extinct. The classic example among these is the passenger pigeon. It was once by far the most abundant bird in all of North America, perhaps in all of the world. Individual flocks in flight stretched from Louisiana to the Ohio River Valley, and there were many flocks. Yet the passenger pigeon became extinct in 1914. But there are bright spots as well. Because of the multitude of programs of land acquisition and wildlife protection inaugurated or inspired by Theodore Roosevelt, other species which would have become extinct were saved in last-minute rescues. The beautiful whooping crane, once diminished to a population of only 14 birds, is making a gradual comeback. Though still endangered, it is no longer anywhere near so close to extinction as then. The sea otter has also been saved and is now well on the road to recovery. Our wildlife heritage has not been lost. Unfortunately, parts of it were lost. But much has been preserved through sound conservation laws and the acquisition of natural habitat. This has been done through increased public awareness of the need. And for many years, telling the conservation story has been the very real concern of Mutual of Omaha and its board chairman, Mr. V.J. Scott, who was born just a few miles from this great monument.
Well, Marlon, we at Mutual of Omaha are very happy to have helped the cause of conservation. We plan to continue this in years to come, for we are keenly aware of the value to all Americans of our wildlife heritage.
The heritage is still ours to cherish and use wisely, and ours to pass on in a healthy state to those who will follow us. It is now and always will be our own responsibility to preserve and protect our heritage of the wild kingdom.
Mutual of Omaha, people you can count on, has presented Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom.
Mutual of Omaha, helping people find Medicare solutions for over 50 years. To learn more about plan options or how to protect your kingdom, contact us today.
Mutual of Omaha. Protect your kingdom.